Recorded at Get a Grip Studios in Toronto, Canada. A Get a Grip management production and in association with the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast. Financially supported by the good folks at the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, this is Restoring Darkness podcast.
This episode of Restoring Darkness is brought to you by Evluma. If you're serious about contributing to the reduction of light pollution, go to evluma.com, hover over products, and click on Dark Sky Friendly Lighting. Both the OmniMax and AreaMax lights are International Dark Sky Association certified. The warmer color temperatures of the OmniMax reduce the more easily scattered blue wavelengths, which contribute to glare and sky glow. With AreaMax lights, you get full cutoff, which also means no uplight and a significantly reduced contribution to sky glow. And all of Evluma's outdoor lighting product lines come with dimmable drivers for even more control. If your customer is looking for dark sky-friendly fixtures with energy savings while still meeting the demands of decorative lighting, look no further than Evluma. Evluma, illuminating the pursuit of dark skies.
Welcome back, darkness restoration enthusiasts. That's right, we're back here on the Restoring Darkness podcast. Today I'm with Tim Brothers. He's the Observatory Manager at MIT's Wallace Astrophysical Observatory, where he teaches students how to observe the night sky with robotic telescopes. He is also the Vice President of the Massachusetts chapter of the International Dark Sky Association and a member of the Model Lighting Ordinance Working Group. He and his wife are quite busy raising chickens and their kids on a rural homestead where they can just barely see that Milky Way. Let's get to him now. What's up, Tim?
How are you? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. We sort of change gears on the Restoring Darkness podcast, and we're moving away from sort of what we miss and some of the pain and suffering, but we always get into a little bit, and we're moving more towards the practical solutions in doing it. I want to start off with this Milky Way on your homestead and that. And, tell me why it's important to have that in your bio, that you can almost see it or kind of see it. Why is that important?
I think we have to make some sort of red line, so to speak, where we say, this is the canary in the coal mine for this particular issue. For climate change, it might be a certain Celsius increase in global temperature or percentage of carbon in the atmosphere. For light pollution, I think it's really about, can you still see the Milky Way? Because I think it's a really good indicator of how pristine, if you've crossed that line to where it becomes a much harder problem to solve. And if you can still see it, the problem is actually very solvable in the near term. And so I think it's important to preserve this large swath of the country that can still see that Milky Way that we talk about a lot. But maybe it's even there, we're not even paying attention to it. And I think that's one of the biggest issues, is just getting people to pause and take a moment, look up, and then you can make that larger connection of, okay, how do we start implementing solutions?
Well, you mentioned climate change, and I wonder to myself often when talking to people is why darkness restoration. That's why I don't like the term dark skies. Yeah. I think it's limiting. I think we want bright skies at night in a way. I think it also doesn't accurately describe what the problem is. And I like darkness restoration and preservation a lot better. I think it kind of describes it. But why is it not considered an environmental issue?
That is a good question. And I can say for my own self, I came to this problem from an astronomer's mindset, worrying about, can I take data? Can I teach my students how to take data? Are those skies going to be accessible? And then sort of over time, the last decade, I've sort of put together the other pieces. This is an environmental problem. It's related to, if you want to see fireflies, if you want your crops pollinated properly, that's a pretty big environmental problem. And the thing is, I think what people don't realize is this problem is moving at the speed of light, really, right? Because we're actually talking about photons here. And so the effects that we're feeling are very immediate, not just in our perception of the night sky, but also, if you think about, well, what's driving climate change? Well, what is it? It's using too much energy, which is largely based on burning carbon still. So if that's your primary problem with the environment as a whole, well, lighting, we've made huge strides in the ability to cut the amount of carbon we're burning. to facilitate that lighting. So I think we actually have a lot we can do to help solve that problem too, this larger environmental issue. Um, burning less carbon, using less energy, um, but we're sort of missing the mark on utilizing those technological advances we've made in the last few years.
Well, I don't like mitigations. When you look at reduction in energy consumption, which is great from a cost savings perspective, but it doesn't seem that like you can mitigate your way out of any problem. Mitigations are like delays, especially like you take water, for example. You can't mitigate your way out of not having, the population and the water supply not equal one another. You need to find a solution to the problem. And that would be,
Right.
desalination or, something on that regard. For me, I want to be able to use as much energy as I want to. I don't want to be restricted. So, well, my position would be we need clean energy and affordable energy so we can use as much of it as we want. You know, and the idea that's one of the when the bean counters are in charge of these issues, that's where you have the problems. Like the thing that frustrates the heck out of me as someone who's co-hosted, hosted, and back hosting this podcast again is that we have a clear environmental issue with darkness restoration preservation. You can go in a million directions, and it's way bigger than not being able to see fireflies. I think it goes down to the transcendent and the spiritual, Tim, where humans have a spiritual transcendent relationship to the night sky, which is extremely important to us. We just don't know that we don't have it right now. And so, but it's solvable, Tim. We can
It's
solve this
solvable, and
problem.
yeah, and I think many of us are finding solutions right now that we just need to. I think we've sort of started to turn the corner with, because we also had to sort of say, well, what exactly is the problem? Is it that, and this goes back to your original point about should we be calling this, using the word dark all the time in all of the nomenclature and the descriptions. Even it's become, sometimes an issue for. So Massachusetts right now, one of our efforts is to pass an outdoor lighting legislation at the state level, and it's often nicknamed the Dark Sky Bill. And while that appeals to many of us advocates in a certain sense, right? Um, the perception that a lot of people get, especially politicians, or the public, when you try to explain this the first time, they say, "Well, I want to be able to use my lights. Are you telling me I can't use any lights?" And it sort of sends the wrong note that says, "Well, certainly, if you need a light, we can use a light and we can design a light and we can install a light that's appropriate. We're just talking about using the appropriate light for the appropriate task." Um, and I think that's the part where we have to sort of get across to people that we can still, live in this first world set of countries and these developing countries and utilize light for tasks, but we just have to use it in a responsible way. So it's more about responsibility and putting a tiny bit of thought into it before you do it versus just saying, no, you can't have any of this. Because then I think it sort of turns people off and saying, well, I want to be able to let my dog out at night and see where he's going, or, I want to leave the porch light on for my partner who's coming home late from a night shift. So we have to sort of start wrapping our heads around that people do use light for real tasks, but there are solutions to making it work for everybody. And I,
Yeah,
and
I
I
mean,
think we're starting to have those solutions at play.
yeah, I mean, I think the IDA has switched to the acronym ROLIN, which is Responsible Outdoor Light at Night, and I think that's a lot more helpful than saying dark skies. I don't think people understand what you're talking about, and I think ROLIN is a lot more helpful. Um, the other part of that is like it's not about dark skies. In fact, it's about dark earth and dark water. And that's the wildlife preservation move. That's the area. It's not just about the sky. It's also about the earth and the things that live on it, and all living things that are here that need darkness. And not just they don't need darkness. They need a cycle of darkness and light, which is the best way to describe it. And the argument that we should have no light, well, that doesn't really fly because we know that light delivers security in certain instances. But I mean, that doesn't mean that we should not limit these things and control them and adjust them based on different things. With technology, Tim, we already have. Like we have the technology.
Well, I think that's what, and I give a lot of presentations, as a lot of people do in this advocacy work. And one of the things that I think people maybe not realize is the technology is actually very basic, right? So the
Hmm.
thing that's going to get us out of a lot of this mess is controls, particularly with the large, high intensity municipal, parking lot lighting, all the above, the big stuff. And we have it in our home already, right? So most people have a dimmer switch,
Hmm.
right, in their house for a chandelier or
Hmm.
maybe their living room lighting or something like that. And we already control the light in an appropriate way for the task, right? You're watching a movie, you dim it or maybe turn it off entirely. We already know those concepts. We've already played with them for decades. And so it's just a matter of putting that outside and utilizing it. So that's one of the cool things. We've talked about it for a long time in the IDA about controls, 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 but I really got to see firsthand what that meant in some of the communities in Massachusetts. So Massachusetts has really pushed especially the LED streetlight retrofit over the last few years to try to cut our carbon, right? So that we have these lofty goals of cutting the carbon out of our atmosphere, reducing energy. But then we put on all these intelligent controls everywhere, and in a lot of towns and cities, they just didn't use them. So they're at
That's
full
the story
blast.
of controls, though. So
Yeah.
the story of controls is one of implementation and then configuration and then forget about it and leave it, and not use it. Um, but I'm in the lighting industry. I work in the lighting industry every single day, and I'll tell you that the people that work in the lighting industry are just as lack as much information about dark sky and dark earth and dark water as the general public, and that is such a tragedy. Um, because Tim, you're talking about Massachusetts changing all of its streetlights. I would propose to you that they have to do it again. you know, I would say that, and why would the lighting industry be against that? Do you see what I'm saying? To me, the darkness play for the lighting industry is the single greatest revenue driver in the next 10 to 15 years for us. Like, I mean, I hate to turn an environmental issue that's about advocacy into dollars and cents, but come on, this is a lighting boom waiting to happen, Tim.
Well, I think you're right, and I think as always, things come down to money in terms of sometimes the final straw on how to solve them. Um, And we've seen that certainly in larger municipalities, right? So we've heard the stories of LA and Chicago and Seattle, and the list goes on and on and on. They were early adopters and they did a second retrofit, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do a third. I think what the average common person would be sort of, and especially, you know, the people who make these decisions who are paying for them often, the mayors and the city councils would be surprised to find out that they were sort of sold on these lights were going to they were going to exist and they were going to function for 30, 40 years,
Yeah.
right? And that's certainly not played out. Um, and either they have to be completely ripped out because we just didn't, the technology was still green, it was early, or maybe just not a lot enough thought was put into, what exactly are we trying to accomplish with these new lights? um, what is the appropriate lighting level? And certainly, the sort of revolution in thinking about, spectrum, right? So that's a huge issue. Is just it wasn't on people's radar, and you can sort of understand why. But what a crazy experiment we've done by changing the
Well,
spectrum of the entire
one
night sky.
environmental group bulldozed another. That's what happened. So
How do you mean?
the so well, so I've been in the lighting industry for 20 years, 21, 22 years probably now. And when I was in the beginning before LEDs, there was a lot of movement within the dark sky movement into the lighting industry. So you started to see cut off wall packs, IDA messaging on boxes. There was momentum there in say 2006 to maybe 11, and then the LED, the carbon group came in and bulldozed all that, just completely eliminated it, and I'm going to say ignored all the information prior to LED in the lighting industry. I call them Johnny Come Lately in the lighting marauders. They came in and they said all the industry information is useless to us. This new LED stuff is going to last forever, and we're going to push this because we want to reduce energy consumption. And the lighting industry got sidelined. That's what happened. And in the beginning, most lighting people resisted LEDs. So the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, which is the sponsor of this show, people that have been in the game for decades and decades, Philips, GE, Sylvania, um, the IES, the Illuminating Engineering Society, resisted LEDs. They didn't want them to penetrate because they didn't understand them. But what happened was other groups formed. One of them was the DLC, the Design Lights Consortium, and other stakeholders not in the lighting industry came in and said, no, no, it's time to do it this way. And so all manner of issues, flicker. We had solved the oscillation issue with lighting with T8 fluorescence, so they don't flicker anymore, causing health problems. Color temperature issues, cut off wall packs were making a deep penetration into the lighting industry, and all of that was blown out. And we have flicker, dark sky problems, non-cut off wall packs, all sorts of manner of problems. And so I would say that one environmental movement bulldozed the other. The other was making progress. So that's in my opinion what happened.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's an interesting and important perspective because you're coming from your perspective in the lighting industry, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeing it on the other end as maybe the citizen slash
Mm-hmm.
astronomer advocate, and certainly that's what we've seen, and as a result of what you're that sort of fits a missing piece, so to speak, of what I see on the back end, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you an example of let's say a town nearby, and this isn't just about streetlights. I think that's also one important thing. People sort of we like to pick on streetlights, but it's those wall packs, right? So one town, and this is the problem, right? So in the name of efficiency, it was subsidized to take out the old lighting, which wasn't great, but just in the purely for efficiency, put in new, 4 or 5,000 K completely unshielded wall packs. They do cut energy, so you can check that box, but they they disable your vision, so they have hard shadows. If it was for
Mm-hmm.
security, yeah, you probably can't even see the walkway in front of you. They're so blinding. If you measure, they're put in without design, right? So there's no designer involved. When you actually measure the foot candles, they're way above what they should be. So they're not even really doing the job, right? They're blinding you. They sort of miss the mark. And so the task part, you can't check that box. They're actually wasting energy because you could have actually saved more. So that's the sort of the interesting thing about that is, sort of if your goal was purely to save energy, you miss the opportunity to save 90% instead of just saving 75 or 60, right? Because you chose too large of an LED. So it hits a lot of different notes. Um, I think it's interesting to sort of tie all of this together. So from what you're talking about, the DLC and the IES and so on, just on efficiency, and sort of speaks to me that, as a scientist, we should have spent some time experimenting. We should have spent some time, for 5 or 10 years debating it amongst all these groups before, this grand experiment of changing the spectrum and the type of light, um, to the point where, what you sort of lose that efficiency if you have to redo the project 2 or 3 times, right? That's an awful lot of waste of throwing lights in the trash, um, just in
They were
itself.
designed
So,
to be thrown out. I mean, the I've been skeptical of LED. Like, if you work in the lighting industry for a long time, there's a term called rated average life. Okay,
okay,
and what rated average life means is that if let's say you say a light bulb's going to last 5,000 hours. Okay, when your client comes in and goes, I wrote the date on it, and I only use it 8 hours a day, Tim, and so I timed it, and I only got 800 hours of life out of this light bulb, so I want a new one. You just say to them, look, rated average life is simply when the light bulbs are run in perfect operating conditions with the base down so that the heat comes away from the base of the lamp and rises up. After 5,000 hours, 50% were still working. That's what it means, right? And
okay,
any lighting device, and I would posit that any piece of electronics or electromechanical equipment, okay, burns out in a very particular fashion, and it's like popcorn. So you ever throw a bag of popcorn in the microwave or cook it on the stove? Nothing happens in the beginning, right? But at a certain point, at a certain heat level, okay, at a certain point when the popcorn heats up enough and the oil's got on it or whatever the heck is in that bag you put, they start to pop. Little one here, little one there, little one here. And then eventually they all start to pop. And then they stop. And at the end you hear pop, 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 right? So the
Right.
idea that a LED light fixture was going to last for so long was a sucker's game from day one. And anybody this is why the lighting industry resisted it, because they knew it was a sucker's game. Then eventually they bought in whole hog and everyone went wild. And we blinded ourselves and we forgot about all the lessons. It's almost like a Greek tragedy, to be honest with you. It's so bad. Like when you
Yeah.
actually look at it, it's epic in its proportions in terms of how bad the outdoor lighting mess is. It's and the fact that the satellites can't see anything, I think, above 3,700 Kelvin. So the measurement of light pollution is not really even correct, because the satellites that look at light pollution can't see 5,000 Kelvin. They can only see HPS. They're configured to see high pressure sodium, right? So
Yeah, I tried to figure out this number at one point because I was curious, how much of that picture are we missing? And I think I want to say it's something like if you figure a good portion of the retrofits were, say, 4,000 K on average, that you're missing a good 20-ish% of the light, across the board. If we
mhm.
especially in these areas that we've heavily converted already, like the Northeast. Um, so yeah, it's something, where it's sort of like flying blind and, forgetting, which way the rudder goes, so we've sort of missed a bunch of steps along the way of, we should have sort of plotted along and tested this, um, and thought about it and explained to people properly. I mean, I've seen some of the proposals come into towns when, and somebody comes to our IDA chapter and says, help, help, these LEDs are coming. We try to help them, walk through and figure out which questions to ask and see if you can steer it at least in a little bit better direction, because it's going to come no matter what, right? Um, because no matter what, at the end of the day, your town manager is sold on, I want to save some money in 10 years, right? That's the proposal. And then you look at the warranty on the lights, and they're told they're going to last 30, 40 years, but then the warranty might be like 5 or 10 at best, in terms of support. So they're not going to last, and then you see all these examples now. Every day in my feed, there's a town whose lights have turned purple or blue because the coating wore
Oh,
off,
the
or
purple thing
something.
is like all over the place now. Like there's purple
It's
lights
it's every
that's
day I get a hit about that, right? And part of that, I have a feeling, is probably because maybe they're running them at 100%. They're not dimming them, right? Because we know that especially these electronics boards, if you turn them down a bit, they're going to last a little bit longer from the less heat dissipation. So that might be a part of it too, or maybe it's just bad phosphor coating, and like every product needs to be
or blah
replaced
blah blah
occasionally.
blah 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 blah
Who
blah.
cares?
You know what I mean? People in the lighting industry knew this, like guys in the trenches. I'm not talking about white tower ivory people that cook up schemes. That people that actually work in the lighting industry every day, they knew this was BS from day one. I'm going back to 2009, 10, 11. You know what I'm talking about? Where it's like these are never going to last forever. Sucker's game. One of the problems with a sucker's game is that, and I get in a lot of trouble. My other podcast is called Get a Grip on Lighting. So, like, get a grip, man. Like, there's just no way that it's possible that they could last that long. Like, what piece of electronic equipment, electrical, mechanical, maybe like breakers can last a long time, but there's no piece of electronic equipment that has a life of longer than 10 years. That's never happened.
Yeah, and to be honest, as somebody who, besides being an astronomer, I work in the lab often, and working with LEDs for decades, was very surprised when I started hearing that these streetlights, which are now outdoors, so it's one thing, I pop LEDs all the time, right? Little over voltage and they go.
Sure.
Um, but then you put it outside, where, especially in, places like, the northern latitudes or New England, where your temperature ranges from, well over 100 to below 20, 20 below, and the idea that these things are just going to stay stable and the boards are going to not crack, or
What a joke.
capacitor is going to blow, was always sort of like mysterious to me, like how they came up with these numbers, like it's going to last a generation,
The
and it's
marketing
electronic.
department came up with the
Yeah.
numbers. The marketing department came up with the numbers, not the research and development department. It's marketing. Look, anybody, like, okay, take your cell phone, put it outside in a freezing cold night for 3 weeks, and leave it out there, and just cover it, even if it doesn't get wet. Just like leave it on and see what happens to it after, and expose it to the elements. It was ridiculous from day one. There's so many possible things that could go wrong. The second question is, nobody ever asked themselves, how do you repair these things? You can't.
Well, I think they're more like you don't actually repair them anymore. They're hot swappable. You just take the
Mm.
whole housing out, and so that's another issue is that's not necessarily out of warranty. That's not a cheap repair. Now I guess they can self-report when they repair. I don't know if that's the biggest selling point, but
I
um,
promise the darkness listeners that Tim and I are going to get back to the darkness, but I think this relates in a way. One of the things that's I've noticed in the lighting industry and um, is two things: either institutional capture or institution apathy, where those two things, I think one precedes the other. I think what happens is these institutions, a lot of them are volunteer driven, and they've gone into this apathetic phase. And I don't know if it's generational because the baby boomers are hanging on and they still want to be in charge and they don't want to put Gen X in charge or something like that. Something's going on with these institutions where the management is kind of half retired or they're growing older or whatever. They're not as engaged and they kind of want to be more consultant types. But if they leave, there's nobody in the pipeline to come in and take over or whatever it is. There's like an apathy. And what happens is they can be captured by other interests. And because of that, and I like there's that's the only explanation because to me the lighting industry was well aware and on of its way to solving the dark sky issues incrementally, like you said, experimenting, moving, a step by step by step, but not, it's not a get rich quick scheme or a get dark quick scheme, but wasn't a get dark slow scheme either. You know what I'm saying? Like we were on our way. I was a lighting distributor. I was, starting to sell dark sky wall packs with CFLs in them and low color temperature CFLs, 27K, 3000K, these sorts of things. And we were even talking about putting sensors and bi-level and stuff like this. And then boom, it gets blown away. I think that interests in selling these products from manufacturers came in and silenced opposition to that. And that's a serious problem when people with vested interests in selling something move into a space where vested interests in selling things are not appropriate.
yeah, I mean, I'd be curious, would you apply that as well to, say, the spectrum question? Because, I think we see that too, where, there's a big push to keep pushing these hyper efficient, high color temperature LEDs, but there's sort of a, pushback to even talking about, these are contributing, whether you're caring about stars or, pollinators, or human circadian rhythms, whatever your issue is,
Or how about
it's
glare?
still or glare, or if you just care about glare and you don't care about any of the other things, high CCT is a large culprit in all of that. Yet we sort of continue to push.
Well, that's a very simple, unscientific answer to that question. And again, I'm going to go back to just my experience in the lighting industry. If you tell someone to look up at a light fixture, a human being, and you say, if you had a 2700K outdoor light there, and you had a 5000K outdoor light there, and you said which one was brighter, they would say the 5000K, which one was brighter. If you say, which one
Yeah.
do you want? They would say, give me the whiter one. That's the brighter, whiter one. And that's a reflex of the photopic, scotopic. Our lizard brains respond to that in a certain way, and we like that. But if you were to take if you were to put the person below that 5000K light, and over a period of 15 or 20 minutes, slowly change the color temperature incrementally down and lower the light level by 40%, they probably wouldn't even notice the difference. And on top of that, if you actually show them a hotel lobby or an office that is lit with a lower Kelvin temperature, they would say it looks nicer than the one with a higher Kelvin temperature. And so the problem is that this decision is not evidence based. The decision to go 5,000 Kelvin with LED outdoor lighting or 4,000 Kelvin has no basis in evidence at all. It is simply based on the perception of people who are buying the lights, and it's a sales thing. And it happens all the time to me. You tell somebody,
Well, I
there's no evidence for it. That's what I'm telling you.
yeah, I guess in my mind, and this is just based on my own sort of anecdotal experience, I would sort of separate that out a little bit and say that the people making the decisions, yes, they're focused on, I guess my job is to put as much light in this task as
Hmm.
possible, and it does some. Often people sort of unfortunately equate high CCT with brightness, but when it comes to an actual regular person, and we did this, for example, in my town in Pepperell, and we copied what other towns have done in terms of streetlight demos,
Hmm.
and we tried different color temperatures, and every single time people choose the warmest possible color.
But did you
Regular
ask them
people
which
who
one
don't
they
know a
thought
lot of,
was brighter?
uh, we 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 didn't ask that specific question because that's not what we wanted to know
Hmm.
what people liked
See,
without
that's
getting
why you should
into,
be in charge of this, Tim. Like this is the kind of thing that, like the color rendering index, okay, was always brought up with HPS. It has a low color rendering index. And that's true. Okay, so it's 20 or whatever it is.
right.
And you know, that's a problem. That's not the issue with LEDs. Now, maybe the color rendering index on a low cost, 27 or 3000K LED is 82, and the color rendering index of the 5000K, because it's more developed, we've done more of that, is 86 or 90. That's statistically irrelevant. You're not talking, 80 down to 20. You're talking about a very minor difference in color rendering index. And so the actual ability, the visual acuity is quite similar between the two. And there's no need for that 5,000 Kelvin or 4,000 Kelvin or 3,500 Kelvin or 3,000 Kelvin, actually. There's no need for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of interesting, and I wasn't sure what to expect when we did our retrofit demo, where we set up a series of 5 LEDs, and then we put in as a control the high pressure sodium. So we left it in there and didn't explain
Mm-hmm.
that that was an old light to people. And so other than a couple key people in town, most people had no idea what they were looking at. They just knew there were different lights, and they just knew they were supposed to vote on a few key things. Which did they overall prefer? Which color did they prefer? Which
Hmm.
one had the most glare or the least glare? So some of the basic things. So we tried to focus on glare being safety and color preference for sort of aesthetic feel of a rural town. What do people think they want? Um, and we had a collection of 2700K, a 2200K LED, and the high pressure sodium. We didn't do any 3000 or 4000K. But within that group, so we had, several different manufacturers. They were all quote unquote fully shielded, as they all really are technically. They all had uplight of, I think, 0 or 1. So pretty good control in uplight, which is one of the key causes of the sky
And you're
glow.
saying
And
1%, not 100, 0 and 1%, like somewhere in between there, uplight
right.
as a
So
percentage. Yeah.
basically
Okay.
basically no, yeah. Um, and we did 1 week at full blast, 100%, and 1 week at 50%. And generally people preferred the dimmed light and they preferred the warmer light.
Hmm.
And what we
I
found
love
is
that.
we went even further. So that's what they chose, right? So that's was the preference. As an IDA person, I knew that the 2200K was in the mix, but sort of left it to what
Hmm.
people wanted. And that's what they chose. And that's what the town went with because they sort
Thank
of had the
God.
input versus, and yes, you do get like that little hit from, a little bit less efficiency, but it ended up with a product that people chose. There was public buy-in. People are happy with it. There's been no complaints. Versus, many of the other towns, people are going ballistic at the lights, of what's been installed. And the other thing is we found is that we could dim even further. So we started them at 50%, and
Hmm.
then in the middle hours, they're down to 30% now.
Wow.
Guess how many people have noticed?
Nobody.
Zero,
Yeah.
zero. And that's
I
what we
could have
find
predicted
over
that.
and
Yeah.
over again. Yeah, and we've heard this anecdote before, and it was sort of fun to try in your own town, and because you know your neighbors, you get to talk to the police officers and say, hey, what do you
Sure.
think? Well, actually, I can see better now.
You know what it is? There's also the window effect, right? Like a lot of people, and I'm not a
I'm not
technical
familiar with
guy.
the window effect.
Okay, so I'll explain it to you. I'm not a technical guy, so I don't know how to explain this in technical terms. So maybe one of the great PhDs who listen to this show or whatever say, "Call again, get it straight. You're not talking about the window effect. You're talking about perception, whatever." But here's how it works: if you're at a party at night and you're inside someone's house, no matter what the light level of the party is, okay, you're not going to be able to see outside the window. because however bright it is in the house, it's well, unless they have an LED street light, crazy nasty 400-watt nasty outside. But let's just say, it's dark outside and it's bright inside. You're in the party. If you're outside, you can watch everything going on through that window like it's a movie. You can see completely clearly as long as there's a contrast between where you are and where they are. And the reason why they can't see out the window is not because of the window, it's because it may not feel it, but there's a glare effect or there's a contrast effect. The human eye sees less good from an area of high brightness into an area of low brightness, right? If you're
Right.
under the light, you can't see into the darkness. That's how it works, which is why a police officer at night, when they're suspicious of you and they come up to your car, they shine a flashlight in your face. So they can see everything about you and you can't see them, right? And so when people are driving in their vehicles and they're under all of these super bright LEDs, or they're coming out of a Walmart parking lot and the light level is like 75-foot candles or whatever, they can't see the road. They can't
Right.
see it. And so this idea that it looks brighter here, but it looks darker over there. So what we need is more lights, more lights, more lights, more lights, more lights, so that it's bright everywhere. The problem is one of glare and contrast. Your eyes or your pupils are so dilated because there's so much light that they can't adjust. And older folks, it takes them even longer to adjust to this darkness. When they go and turn out of that parking lot or come off that on-ramp onto the highway or whatever it is, they can't see in front of them. And that's just a fact. That's not, and I don't know how to scientifically describe that to you, Tim, but that's a fact. So we have to reduce the light level, shield it, and push it down so people are seeing into the light rather than not being, totally, I don't know what the right word is, but totally saturated by it. Their pupils are totally saturated by this LED light, and, they're totally broad and they can't see down the road.
Yeah, I think, the direct example for that is that headlights are really bright now, and they do a
Mm-hmm.
really good job of roadway illumination. And that coupled with, say, like some reflectorized roadway markers, um, and maybe some dimmer lights along the way, or more, more spaced out lighting. Maybe you don't need them every, so many feet. Especially in rural roads would be just fine. I'm a night worker. I come home sometimes at 2, 3 in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and the roadways that don't have much lights on them, I can see just fine with my truck lights. But you get to one town in particular, and you can't see anything in the crosswalk, right? They're at full blast all night long. No one's out. It's not a town that has anything open past 8 p.m. And you sort of have to question, well, oh, there's a deer, and you sort of see it last second. Well, and I can tell you that even in your 40s, your eyes start getting a little bit hazier, right? Because your eyes start to crystallize a little bit more. And every single talk I give, and I'm sure you've experienced this, you get a person who's retired who says, "Is this why I can't drive anymore at night?"
Mm-hmm.
And we're
My
seeing more and
mother-in-law
more
just said
people
that to
come
me
up.
the other day. My mother-in-law just
Yeah,
said it to me the
they,
other day. Yeah.
they say, "I cannot see anything. I don't feel safe driving anymore," and that seems tragic, right? So we're people are living longer, but then they're more trapped, right? Because now they can't go out at night. Well, it seems like we've sort of failed in our job in terms of illuminating the night safely, right?
Well, I
So if the
described it
task
to her
was
like
what,
this. So my mother-in-law was complaining to me, and I can't remember, we were driving somewhere, and my son goes down and picks her up now and brings her back. And so I was like, okay, I'll drive you home, whatever. I'm in the car with her, and she's like, yeah, I can see now, but when we drive under that bridge and we come out, I can't see for a while. After I come out from under the bridge, the bridge has these super bright LED lights, right? And the bridge has all these bright LED lights around it. So you enter this saturation of extremely high light levels at night. And when she comes out of the other side of the bridge, she says she can't see for 3 or 4 seconds, and it scares the crap out
yeah,
of her.
yeah,
And she's like, "You can see right now?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can see fine." She's like, "I can't see anything in front of the vehicle." That's just her telling me, that this is my eyes. My eyes are not adjusting as quickly as yours are, and so I can't drive at night anymore. And
yeah, and when you say stories like that, I mean that's exactly the story I have in my mind, and I think about, well, if I'm having a trouble now, if I'm driving from Cambridge to Boston across the bridge, and by the time I hit all those bridge lights and I get to downtown Boston, I can't see anybody in the crosswalk, and I'm in my 40s. Imagine being in your 60s or 70s or 80s. It must be pretty terrifying. So, it's something we really need to think about, especially as we also, we're trying to push people into biking more and
Totally.
pedestrian, right? So we want people to use public transportation and all these things. Well, you want to be able to see, the bus or the bicyclist on the side of the road. Um, that's an environmental issue too, right? So we want to make all of this is really connected.
Now, what is Michael Colligan doing here, dressed differently, sounding a little bit differently because it's a different day? Well, that's because this conversation with Tim Brothers went on for another 30 or 40 minutes. And so we decided to split this episode up into 2 episodes. That's right, Tim. We're getting a 2-for-1 out of you. So the second one will drop in a couple days. For right now, darkness restoration advocates, thank you for listening.
Look no further for dark sky friendly products than Evluma. Since its first product launch, Evluma has carried 1 or more International Dark Sky Association certified models. If your customer cares about light pollution, suggest the OmniMax with shielding or the AreaMax with full cutoff to reduce uplight and glare. Evluma, illuminating the pursuit of darkness.